Today's podcast is brought to you by Funny Bone Broth, now available at Italy and McEwen's in the TD Center. Or you can visit them at funnybonebroth.com.
In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast. My name is Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we've got another great show. And JB, I don't know what it says, the fact that our off-season shows are definitely more interesting than our during-season shows. I don't know what that says about us.
Well, I'm not sure that's true, but yes.
I don't know if it's true either, but we certainly have been blessed with a lot of great guests over the last few weeks, starting with Craig Rowe and then, of course, Shaq Richardson last week. And this week, of course, we get to talk to Juwan Brescacin. So it's been 3 very exciting interviews in consecutive weeks. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's fantastic that the guys are reaching out and trying to keep some interest in the league.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing, and everyone's been really receptive to it as well. We've heard a lot of really good feedback. Just fans excited to hear what some of these players have to say. So we've got the Brescacin interview coming up a little bit later on in the podcast. We're going to talk about receivers today and their sort of receiving core and how we start to boil that down, because I think we've got 19 receivers on the roster right now, and obviously you can't go into a season with that many and without the luxury of having camp and seeing what everyone can do. We're going to try and maybe see if we can't sort some things out or come up with a plan for that. We're also going to talk a little bit about Chris Cuthbert. And then, JB, you wanted to do a recommendation for some viewing for our listeners and for me as well.
Yeah, I think it's important each time we come on here to always be thinking about expanding our understanding of the world and, engaging with information that makes us smarter about society and race and power. So I have a recommendation for us.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that. So let's get it started by talking about the Argos receiving core. So like I said, 19 receivers on the roster. I think one of the things that makes this process both easier and more difficult is that I expect Coach Dinwiddie to move pieces around the way that the receivers were moved around in Calgary over the last couple seasons. And so what I mean by that is that when you watch Calgary's offense from the last few years, it's rare that you find one receiver in the same spot, throughout the course of an entire game. They may play a few more snaps, as the boundary one or the field one than others, but they moved around a ton. They had so many different formations, but also receivers learn to play the different positions as well. So your Z isn't always in the same spot, depending on the look that you're giving. And so what that ends up with is it's a great offense in terms of, what the defense has to prepare for. It's really tough to match guys up because you don't know where they're going to be, and you can easily get corners that are suddenly having to play on the inside and out of their comfort zone. So it creates a lot of issues for the defense that you're going up against. But it is a little bit more tricky to learn, and that's the downside of it. And that's, but it's something that I'm sure Toronto fans are going to be really excited about, because we just didn't see that much at all last year. Like last year, when you look at the Argos receiving core, Coach Chapdelaine generally had Darrell Walker as the number 1 on the boundary. Usually SJ Green was right beside him in the slot. And then you either had Noel or Rodney Smith sort of as the big man to the inside. They moved him around a little bit, but usually he was going to be on the inside to the field, clearing out for Armani Edwards at the number 2. And then Jimmy Ralph was basically invisible, always stuck at that field side 1. And that was it. There just wasn't that much movement. So I'm excited about that for one, but I think that might make trying to come up with our starting group and our dress group a bit more difficult.
Yeah, and I might even ask as we get into it, if there was a listener who maybe didn't know what the letters and the numbers referred to in terms of wide receivers. Could you give a kind of little brief synopsis of what that might be?
Yeah, for sure. So the letter designations are a little bit different team to team, and you find differences also between American and Canadian. In my system, the way I've got it set up, I've got Y to the inside on the boundary side. So Y would be number 3 boundary side. We've got W as the middle guy to the trips boundary side. And then I've got Z as the number 1 on the boundary side. And that's a pretty standard configuration, although I know sometimes people do have Y on the outside, but usually Y is sort of that tight end type body. And so in Canadian football, that tends to be your, that Rodney Smith kind of guy that's third on the inside. And then to the field side, X, I've got way out wide, and then I've got V inside in the slot.
And boundary and field?
And the boundary side is the shorter side, and the field side, the wide side. And so, yeah, when we make reference to field and boundary, it really matters in Canadian football because there's so much more space. The field is that much wider. The field side is massive, and you can really get lost out there. And so typically in Canadian football, you generally are going to put your better receivers on the boundary side because it's an easier throw for the quarterback. A much higher percentage of balls go to the number 1 and 2 that are lined up in the boundary.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that certainly I have found over the years as I became more knowledgeable is, it's just unbelievable the depth that you can get into. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why I like the podcast and I think that people, fans, the more fans realize these things, I think the better, because I would say that many fans don't necessarily know the wide receiver designations or field versus boundary, so I think that stuff's really important to try and get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, as we start looking at the Argos roster, what I want to try and do is see if we can just loosely come up with like a 7 or 8, a group of 7 or 8 receivers, because typically on a CFL team, you will dress 7 or 8 receivers. Now, last year, the Argos usually dressed 7 because they had both Cross and Sibasu dressed because both were special teams contributors, and Cross was generally playing the fullback role. But when Cross was injured, it was just Sibasu at fullback, and then they were able to dress 8 receivers. So just to make it easier on us, I figure we'll see if we can kind of put out an 8 that we're happy to go with here. And happy is a difficult one because I'm not really happy with any of these that I've started kind of mocking on paper because we have so many quality receivers and then a lot of question marks that we just don't know enough. And it seems a bit ridiculous to write somebody off just because I haven't seen much of them. But we got a bunch of guys here with an amazing track record.
So who would you pick as the top 2 receivers heading into the season?
Well, I think there's 3 locks to start, and I think that is DeVaris Daniels, Natea J, and Juwan Brescacin. I think those guys are going to be on the field pretty much no matter what, and in almost any look. I think you're going to have those 3 guys out there, and so if that's what you're working with, you look at sort of the skill set we have here. With those 3 guys, none of those 3 guys are burners per se. None of those guys are 4-3 guys. We've got some really good height in Brescacin. Daniel's 6'1". But what this presents is an opportunity to kind of go into 2 different packages. So you could go with like a big package if that was sort of your strategy and decide, we're going to go with big targets. You add to those 3 guys, you add Vince Male, who's 6'2" and like built like a truck. You got Kieras Garrett, who's 6'4". Kent Shelby's a great player at 6'3". And then they just drafted Sam Baker, who's 6'3", and you're probably not quite ready yet, but those are all options of guys that are like 6'2" or bigger. And so, that is something you could do. Or you could go the extreme speed route where you've got newly drafted first round pick Dejan Brissett. You've got Chandler Worthy, who, we saw some exciting stuff from last year. Jewel Davis, who can really move. And then I know a guy that you're really excited about, Quadarius Smith. I can't wait to see what he is. Seeing him, playing somewhere outside of Akron, I think probably needs to happen before we anoint him a starter or even have him making the roster. But man, he could move. So, that presents some exciting options if you want to go like all speed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by it because I think it is the load-bearing wall of the Dinwiddie reign. He is an offensive coordinator, and he does not have any head coach experience, and there are going to be players in the room who are going to wonder, what are his bona fides? Is he going to be able to deliver the goods? And as an offensive guy, he's going to have to come in and deliver the goods. I think that if he can come in and he can handle his side of the ball, that will go a long way to winning the room for him.
I'm also really interested to see how much of it he leaves to Jarius Jackson. Whether Jarius Jackson, who is on paper the offensive coordinator, whether he is really the offensive coordinator, or if this is going to be Dinwiddie running the offense and Jarius Jackson more taking on the role of quarterbacks coach, which is also in his title.
And we talked about that being the Calgary model. It's not any aspersions on offensive coordinator, but that was the model he came from.
So let me take a stab at my 8 here. And I know I'm going to just get ripped for this because there's really, it's not a fair process at this point. But if I look at my 8, I've got Brescacin, Daniels, Ajay, Male, Brissett, and Worthy to start. So that gives us 6. And I think those 6 are pretty much guaranteed in my mind. And that leaves you with, 2 more spots for your game day roster. And so then I think you take one of your speed guys. You take either Smith or Davis here. And I think I've got to lean towards Jewel Davis right now, just until we see Quadarius Smith. So I'll go Davis there. And now one of the size guys, who's, we're talking about Shelby, Garrett, or Baker. And like I said, I don't think Baker's quite there yet. I think he needs a bit of time on the practice roster. And I've been really impressed with what I've seen from Shelby, just watching his game film. So I think that's probably where I'd lean at this point. So that leaves us Brescacin, Daniels, Ajay, Male, Brissett, Worthy, Davis, and where was I here? Shelby. Yeah, Ken Shelby would be our 8th.
Where do you think TJ Jones fits into this?
I don't think he does. And that's going to completely throw this off if he does end up signing with the Argos. We have to start all over again because he's on the field if he's here. But just, the things that we've been hearing the last, couple of weeks, they just don't sound good. I know, like on Rod Peterson's show, he was talking about how, I guess he had spoken to TJ's agent, and it didn't really sound very good. And JD from 3 Down was talking about it recently as well, and he basically said that what he's hearing is that they're just at a standstill because he's not going to come to play in the CFL for $60,000. So I think unless somebody files a grievance of some sort, I think that may be the end of the story. And so I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong, but the way it looks right now, I think these are going to be the guys, and that's okay. Obviously Jones makes us better. He makes any team in the CFL better, but
yeah, I agree. I don't think he's a make or break. Obviously it would be great if we can add him. He's, he is a, I don't know, elite, but he is a very good player and he's a professional, and I think it's great anytime you can add that, especially to what is quite a untested group in a lot of ways.
I'm joined now by brand new Toronto Argonauts wide receiver, Juwan Brescacin. Juwan, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
No problem. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Now, I was excited, like when the Argos first signed you, the first thing I thought of, having watched you play in Calgary the last few years, the first thing I thought of is I had this immediate flashback to this tall, skinny kid in high school that I remember, playing over a decade ago. I got a couple questions about your start to football. Like, you went to Loyola Catholic Secondary School. That's a school that was far more known for basketball. It sort of had an on-off relationship with football. Did you go into high school thinking you'd play football?
I actually didn't. So, just getting you up to speed to where I am today, I actually started playing football when I was about 9 or 10 years old for the Mississauga Bobcats. And I stopped in like grade 6 or 7 to focus on just strictly basketball. So when I went to Loyola, I went there to play basketball and to play with my best friends that I grew up playing with. And they told us that we were having a junior varsity football team. And I wanted to play receiver just because football was always fun to play, and I didn't play it for a couple of years. And then they ended up putting me at quarterback. So I actually didn't get to play receiver in high school until like grade 11.
The first time I saw you on the field, it was at St. Marcellinus. I think you guys had this little tiny square of a field, and so you played all your home games at other locations. And I think Marcellinus was where you played mostly that year. Yep. And we were mostly interested in watching St. Joe's, who you were playing that day. And then we see this, 6'4" quarterback wander onto the field, running all over the place, like Steve Young, making plays downfield. And we were preparing for St. Joe's, and I remember thinking, whoa, we better get preparing for Loyola here because of this kid. I can't say your coach had you in the wrong position. Having an athlete like yourself touching the ball in every play is definitely not a bad thing.
Yeah, I think that was their mindset. But honestly, looking back, I think about it sometimes, not saying, that I was a great quarterback, but I think about like if I were to keep playing quarterback, what would have happened? It was just fun. I like to run around and make plays and throw the ball. I didn't really know anything about reads or anything, but I was just looking for the guys that were running, those 9 routes just going downfield, and I was just trying to launch it to them. So
yeah, you basically had 2 reads. It was you love the quick hitches or 9 routes.
Yeah.
And so the coach had you rolling out a lot on like naked bootlegs, and left or right, and then you just launch at about 60 yards downfield.
Yeah, it might have looked like they designed those plays, but it was more me running for my life and trying to make something happen. So, it's actually funny because my cousin Deontay was my center, and he would snap it all over the place, and I'd have to go get it and break a few tackles and try and make something happen. But looking back, like those were some of my favorite years of football.
It's so much fun at that age, right? It's just kids out there having fun, and it's even more fun when you can throw a football 60 yards. But that was it was certainly a good time. I was able to dig up some old game film for you, so I'll make sure to send that along.
Awesome.
I have you playing St. Joe's, and I have you playing Lorne Park.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Which is a much closer score than I remember. It's 21-15. It came down to the wire a little bit there.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember getting ready for that game, and I think my cousin played with a lot of the guys on the Lorne Park team because I think they played for the Warriors, which I never did. And they were telling us like, "Oh, these guys are stacked. They're a great team." And I'm like, "Well, I guess we're just gonna have to see how good they are." And we went out there, and it was pretty close up until the end. I think I threw a pick 6 and lost us the game.
It was pretty tight until the end. And yeah, it was a good team. We won the championship that year and we're undefeated. But I think that was the closest game that we had all year. So it was pretty much you carrying everybody on your back. So it's a credit to the level of athleticism. And I guess, fire for a kid that's just out there having fun.
Well, thank you, because it was new to me, but I just felt like it came natural. And like I said, when you're having fun, it makes everything so much easier to do.
Yeah, no kidding. So when did you know that you were, because I would say in grade 10, you probably were a better basketball player than a football player. Would you agree?
Yeah. I'd say I was good at both, but basketball was definitely what I wanted to do at the time.
So when was it that you realized, you know what, I think football is going to be a better play for me?
So I ended up going to a military academy in Indiana for school and basketball. And when I got there, they wanted me to play football as well. So I started playing receiver, and I grew up always loving to watch Randy Moss play. He was my favorite receiver growing up, and I finally got the chance to play receiver. And there came a point where I was getting basketball and football looks and scholarship talks, both verbally and officially. And I was told that I had to make a decision on what I wanted to do. And at the time, when I was asked, I was playing football, and I think I have 3 or 4 school records there still for receiving.
Nice.
And so I feel like I was pretty happy with how things were going football wise, that I kind of just made a quick decision, not really knowing that, I was going to have a great senior basketball season as well. I was just thinking big receiver, I can catch, and run a bit, pretty athletic. So I was like, you know what, let me just see where football takes me. And I'm not going to say I regret the decision, because obviously, like, I'm playing professionally, but sometimes I think about if I went the basketball route, what would have happened. But, I'm happy with where I am right now.
It's funny, like, it's a blessing to have options like that, to be able to choose, do I want to accept this basketball scholarship or this football scholarship? Like, it's a great position to be in.
100%.
But yeah, you can't help but wonder, choices that we all make in our life. I was talking to Craig Rowe a couple of weeks ago, new Argos defensive end from Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. And he says he sometimes thinks about, what if he'd gone to Stanford instead of Michigan? What might life have been like? Because it shapes everything about you, like all the decisions you make, like your identity, who you are. But I think that's the same, for a kid that decides to go to Waterloo Engineering or go to Queen's Business or, what have you. It's these decisions, they're so important. And there you are at like 18 years old trying to make a decision that's going to impact the rest of your life.
Yeah. I think looking back, the silver lining is, I can advise kids who are in my situation, or, my kids in the future, to, take their time and really weigh the pros and cons on any decision you may want to make. But at the same time, I didn't think I was making a life-changing decision. It was just a decision. So,
So what do you say to kids? Like, if a kid comes to you and says, I can't decide between these 2 schools, or I can't decide between these 2 sports, like, what's your advice?
So those talks are 2 completely different things for me, because when talking to kids about committing to a school or, going to a school, there's a lot of things that come into play as far as, what can you see yourself taking? What's the school known for? Like Northern Illinois is known for their business and nursing program, which I did neither of. So there was that. But also not going to a school because, the coach likes you or really wants you to come, because I got to NIU my first year, and that coaching staff and the coach that recruited me basically left in 1 year. So I was kind of left like, what do I do? And as far as sports, I would just say, pick the sport that you love the most, and you could see yourself getting up every day, working out, going to practice, and basically putting the time in to be the best at that sport every single day.
It's so tough for kids to disregard the coaching staff when making a commitment. Like I've had a number of kids that I'm trying to, help make that decision with them, which program do I go with? And it's almost always for the kids, I really like this coach. I think I want to play for him and I want to go there. But like you say, there's so many times where a year or two down the road, that entire staff is gone. So yeah, I think there's some value there in what you're saying, where you kind of have to think about the school more than the people, because you can't count on the people necessarily being there unless it's one of those legacy coaches that's been around for 15, 20 years.
Yeah, because I don't really know how it works in Canada, but in America, in the smaller conferences, like the Mid-American Conference, a lot of the schools, a lot of the coaches go to those schools so they can use it as a stepping stone to get to a bigger school, which is fine with us as players. But at the same time, when you first go there as a freshman, you don't really think about the coaching staff leaving, and then another coach coming in, bringing in his recruits, his guys that he wanted, and you may be an afterthought, or you may still be able to do what you came to the school to do.
And it's pretty similar in Canada in that you have a lot of the coaches have had CFL experience, and if that job comes calling again, if someone knocks on the door and wants to bring them back to the CFL, I think that's a tough thing to sometimes turn away. So I think that it's a different thing in Canada because we don't have it's not like the how spread out the NCAA is with all these different conferences and Power Five and everything else. But you still have coaches on the move, coaches in and out. And people using one job as a stepping stone and so on. I want to talk about Coach Dinwiddie for a minute, because you had a chance you spent a lot of time with Coach Dinwiddie in Calgary. And I think you probably know more about him than anyone I've talked to since he signed on here as head coach. What sort of head coach is he going to be?
I think that Dinwiddie is going to be a great coach for the Argos, especially given, kind of the inconsistent wins to, losses during the seasons. You go from the Grey Cup to, I guess they were one of the worst teams in the league after. And it's not really a reflection of, what the Toronto Argonauts have been in history, right? So I think that RD is going to bring, that fire to the team. And on top of that, he's very smart. And, I could see how he grew from his first year in Calgary to where he was his last year in Calgary. And, he was a guy that always wanted the most out of me. And, he wasn't afraid to call people out. And, he gave his input a lot as far as what we did as an offense in Calgary. And I think he's the perfect guy for Toronto.
It's got to feel pretty good that you and Davaris, I guess, as well, are brought in, basically by a guy that has seen you play, knows what kind of player you are, what kind of work ethic you have, and goes out on a limb here to bring you guys in. I think that's a pretty big compliment, knowing that this is a first opportunity for him and he's got to prove himself as a head coach. And he obviously had a lot of impact in bringing you guys in to play for the Argos. That's got to feel pretty good, no?
Yeah, it definitely did. And to be honest, when he signed, it kind of made me want to come home more, just because I was familiar with him. But at the same time, I didn't know if he would have wanted to bring me in. You just never know, what people's plans are as far as their team or even what the team needed. But when I had the opportunity to talk to him, especially coming off a knee injury, he still had that, belief in me as a player, and he wanted me to be a part of rebuilding the Argos. And the decision was almost a no-brainer for me to be able to come back home and then also be able to get Toronto back to where it was as far as a team, but also help grow the popularity of the team in the city again. And I mean, you see the path that they went on, basically signing, I think there was like 22 guys from the Toronto area or something like that.
Yeah, the numbers are crazy.
Yeah, which is, I think is great. And the great thing is that we all can play football. We've all proven that we can play football. And, I'm looking forward to that.
It's really interesting when it comes to the ratio. You're referred to as a ratio breaker, as a skilled Canadian receiver who would start regardless of where he's from. The fact that you're Canadian is very helpful because, you know the ratio rules as well as anyone. But just looking up and down this roster, I think the Argos are going to be well above the ratio when it comes to starting. I think, we might see 8, 9, 10 Canadian starters just based on merit, forget where they're from.
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in, your passport shouldn't dictate how much you can play or where you can play. So I think the fact that we have that versatility as far as Canadian players and that depth that we have, I think that's just going to make us an even better team because we're going to be able to do different things at different positions. And I think that it'll only make us a better team.
And how about Peel Region representing? There's like a quarter of the team from Peel Region, which is pretty amazing. Between Kassar and Achampong who were just brought in, and you got Brissett, Nate, yourself. There's so many guys from Mississauga, Brampton. That's pretty exciting, and that's an area that maybe they're hoping to tap into as a potential fan base too.
Yeah, I think that the Peel Region has a lot of promise as far as athletes, and I know that there's still Argos fans out there, and they're just waiting for something to cheer for, and hopefully we can give them that.
So I broke down every single Calgary snap last season, trying to figure out what this offense is going to look like this year. Juwan, what's this offense going to look like this year?
I think that, just judging by playing in that same system, it's an offense that is going to be dynamic, but also be complex as far as learning it and defenses figuring out. And honestly, as long as we're on the same page, it's an offense that's really hard to stop. So I think that we'll be able to put a lot of points on the board and be entertaining to watch.
What I liked about it is how it sort of picks on the other team's film study. So they give you a look that you've seen before, but there's a twist off of it. And so you're now overcompensating for this play you've seen multiple times on film, but then suddenly, it's there's play action in it, or there's a different move. A lot of those plays stem from, basically a search run where you've got the number 2 or 3 receiver kicking out the end on the far side. And there's so much action that came off of that. And I found that really exciting to watch. I'm looking forward to seeing some dynamic packages like that, where it's not just the same plays we see week in, week out, but an offense that builds throughout the year. So hopefully, that's the kind of thing that we have to look forward to.
Yeah. In Calgary, I noticed that, like you said, we pick on film study, and it's basically taking what the defense is giving you and not trying to force anything, and just doing a great job of seeing the defense's tendencies and seeing who's giving up what or what they do versus this look, and just drawing up plays week in and week out to take advantage of that.
Where are you most comfortable? Do you like being like number 1 boundary side?
I've played everywhere, so I liked my spot in Calgary, but I also felt like I could contribute in other areas as well. So I like playing to the field, but I've played in the slot and the boundary. I think 2 years ago I played against Hamilton and had a career game at that spot. So I just like playing anywhere. Basically, I think I can play anywhere, and I enjoy it.
Do you like going against man or zone better? You have a preference?
I think everybody loves man because it's you versus another person, and the best man wins.
The way I see you play man, like when I watch your film, to me it looks like instead of trying to create separation off the snap, I feel like you actually try and bring your defender in closer and then wait until the ball's in the air to create separation. Like you basically use your physicality. You don't get pushed off your stem. You leave a little window between you and the sideline, and then once that ball's in the air, whether it's like a little chicken wing or just that little burst of speed, that's the moment you're waiting for to create separation. Have I read that wrong, or is that sort of your man strategy?
I think depending on what the route is, yeah, but I think that just comes it's not really something that I'm thinking about. I think it just comes natural from my years of playing basketball. And I think that's why I've been able to have the success that I've had, just by being big and being able to catch. And in a professional league, you're not really going to get that much separation because the guys on defense are really good athletes and good players as well. So you're going to have to be able to find ways to, make a catch that's contested or, make a play in a small window. So I think that's just how it happens naturally.
Have you had a chance to talk to Matt Nichols or McLeod Bethel Thompson yet?
Yeah, I have.
Do you guys have Zoom meetings set up, or is that not in play yet?
We've been doing voluntary ones, just the QBs and the receivers. We're not bound to it by our team, but we've been talking over the playbook and stuff. So, yeah, we've been doing that for, I think, a couple of weeks now.
Is that something Matt's really taking a leadership role in?
Yeah, I'd say they both are, to be honest.
That's cool.
They both obviously have played at a high level, and they're capable of playing at a high level, and they're both really smart and great quarterbacks. So I'm honestly happy to have both of them.
Now, I talked to Shaquille Richardson last week, and he said of all the 60 new guys that have been brought in, he's most excited about playing with you and Tavares. Why do you think that might be?
I think just our time in Calgary together. We all came into Calgary at the same time, and we all know what we're capable of doing. So I think Shaq is a great player, and I think he respects me and Tavares. So I think that's what it comes down to.
Now, he mentioned to me that he felt pretty strongly he'd give you some trouble on the basketball court. Any comment on that?
I personally don't think that. I personally don't think that he would faze me at all. I don't even know if he can dribble a basketball. So, Shaq's a guy who's very confident in himself, but with that comment, he's borderline delusional.
So if you had to assemble an Argos basketball team, 5 guys, you're not going to include Shaq in that 5?
No.
Who are you going to then? Who are your starting 5?
That's a good question. I think I'm going to go me, Dejan, Tavares, Nate, and I need a big man.
Yeah, you got all receivers here.
I don't know what, because I think that we're some of the best athletes. So
that's true.
And I need a big man.
What about Drake Nevis down low? He's only 6 feet tall, but
I would take him, but I don't know if he can play or not. I might take Randy Richards.
Nice.
He's another Calgary guy, but I don't know if he could play either. So I don't know. You might have to give me my 5th.
All right, I'll work on that. I'll try and come up with a 5th.
All right, cool.
I definitely hope Shaq listens to this podcast. You're gonna be facing so much press coverage in training camp when we eventually get there.
I know, but I'm looking forward to that anyways.
Yeah, I think more. We need football more than anything right now, and Argos fan base is so excited about this season with all these new faces. I think it's going to be a fantastic year when we eventually get there.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, I think we all need it. Especially going to a new environment with a new team, you just look forward to just being in the locker room and being around everybody, getting to know everybody, and winning some games.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. Well, Juwan, thanks so much for joining me today. You've been really generous with your time. I really appreciate it, and all the best this season.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
That was Juwan Brescacin, wide receiver, Toronto Argonauts. It was great to have him on the show, and that was an interview I really enjoyed. Let's move on to talk a little bit about Chris Cuthbert. Some news, of course, this week that he'd be leaving his post that he's had at TSN for the last 15 years. And he's really been the voice of CFL in this country. So that's a huge loss, I think.
I agree. I mean, Chris Cuthbert is, I think, after Bob Cole, the number one sports voice in Canadian sports, in Canadian media. I think that it's not a minor thing. I think any more than in the States, if Al Michaels suddenly said, oh, well, I'm not going to call football anymore. It's not just like, oh, well, we'll just plug in another guy. I mean, Chris Cuthbert is, a legend in my opinion. He called the gold medal game. His voice is the voice of the CFL. I think it's going to be really hard for them to find somebody as good as him.
Yeah, like they've still, they've obviously got a few guys, but I feel like it's maybe time to bring somebody in, somebody that's not, currentently working for TSN. I think it's time to find a new voice to sort of be that, new Chris Cuthbert. And I think we'll probably resist a little bit at first, because I did with Cuthbert when he first came in. I kind of thought of him as one of the voices of hockey, and so when he started calling CFL games, I remember my instinct immediately, and really irrationally so, was like, oh, this doesn't sound like a football game. Over a couple of years, I softened and started actually listening to what he was saying, and there was it wasn't just the way he called the game, and having the perfect voice for the job too. There was nobody that was better prepared. He knew every single player on every roster in the CFL without even having to think for a second about it. And he had stories about them all, and he talked to them all, and he kept up his relationship with all these guys, and that made for outstanding television. And that's not just a position that you can now just plug in a new guy and we'll pick up where we left off. There's going to be a bit of a gap.
Well, as you know, I am the man of 1,000 voices. I think that my ability to impersonate is pretty well recognized.
By you.
I often share my impersonations with you of celebrities.
Well, if you'd like to give us your Chris Cuthbert, I'll entertain it.
Okay. Right, here we go. So Cuthbert would be, I love his high pitch, the golden goal.
That's pretty
Cuthbert's
good.
high-pitched voice is the voice that I will remember of Montreal winning the Cup in '93. His scores is, so that's probably why I have such deep affection for him, because that Stanley Cup run is certainly close to my heart as a Montreal fan, to reveal myself as a Montreal fan. But I'm really excited he's going back to hockey. I am sad for football, but I agree with you that I hope they take the opportunity to, to kind of move outside the box a little bit and try and find somebody new. Try and find a new voice. Try and find somebody maybe a little bit younger. And have younger fans have a guy who's their guy.
Yeah, exactly. All right, why don't we get to your TV show recommendation? This is something that I've been looking forward to, and I don't know what it is yet. So, please.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I talked about in my article was sort of along the lines of the importance of not just being interested in race and power and society for a week or 2 weeks, but it being a commitment to do the rest of my life, and hopefully other people also make that commitment, that it isn't some sort of fad, but is, like a change in the way that people are making changes about how they view the world environmentally. I think people need to make changes about how they view the world in terms of power dynamics. And for me, I had mentioned in my article The 13th, which is a superb documentary by Ava DuVernay. And also by Ava DuVernay is a miniseries called When They See Us that is on Netflix. It is about the 1989 Central Park jogger case, where 5 young men of color were arrested, charged, and convicted for a crime, an assault on a female jogger, rape and assault that they did not commit. And it is not an easy watch. It is, angering and saddening. But I think that it is also important to look at how the structural machine created a scenario where these young men were basically convicted due to the color of their skin and their lives ruined. That they were sent to jail for this crime that they did not commit. And it's really worth watching. There's some also additional stuff. There's an interview on Netflix, When They See Us Now, where Oprah interviews the young men who are now not young men anymore, and how they have dealt with it in their lives. And that's a very powerful experience to watch that. But I really would recommend to people to try and watch the series. It's really, it's 4 parts. It's not an easy watch, but it is an important watch, and it's really, really well made television. It absolutely is, powerful and engaging and thought provoking. So that would be my recommendation for people, if you have some time, is start an episode of When They See Us and think about it.
That's it sounds fantastic, although definitely not something I can binge. It's going to be so emotionally draining. I can tell just from your description. That's something that you just got to set yourself up for, and slowly go through it one episode at a time and enjoy it, but really let it motivate that reflection.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's one of those questions. Like, yeah, it's hard to watch, but like, it's much harder to be that person who's going to jail. So it's like, that's always on us to never give up or sort of check out from things that make us uncomfortable, because we can, because we don't have to deal with it unless we intellectually choose to. And that's important too, I think, for people to, to watch some stuff that makes you uncomfortable and to get more comfortable with being uncomfortable.
All right, well, that will just about do it for us today on the X's and Argos podcast. I want to thank Juwan Brescacin again for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe, to rate, and tell all of your Argo fan friends about us. Until next time, for JB, I'm Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones.